My sister stole the man I was supposed to marry and had the audacity to invite me to their wedding with a handwritten note that read, "Come witness true love." They fully expected me to sit in the back row and quietly shed tears of defeat. Instead, I showed up to the cathedral wearing a custom white designer gown. When the priest looked out at the congregation and asked if anyone objected to the union, I did not hesitate. I stood up, walked straight up the aisle, and said, "I object." Then I handed the priest a small velvet box. My sister dropped her bouquet, and her face drained of all color when she saw exactly what was inside. I am Simone. I am 35 years old, an African-American woman who built a highly successful career as a financial fraud investigator. Before I tell you exactly what was in that box and how I legally dismantled my family perfect facade, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives who mistook your silence for weakness. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the mail arrived. I had just wrapped up a massive corporate audit for a client and walked down to the lobby of my building to check my mailbox. Among the bills and catalog magazines was a thick square envelope made of heavy textured paper. The calligraphy on the front was unmistakable. It was my mother, Patricia, handwriting. She had spent hours perfecting those loops and swirls. When I broke the wax seal, a piece of heavy cardstock slid into my hand along with a smaller piece of personalized stationery. The gold foil lettering gleamed under the hallway lights. It announced the upcoming holy matrimony of Dominique and Trey. Just reading his name next to hers sent a hot spike of anger through my chest. Trey was the man who had proposed to me less than a year ago in a crowded restaurant while my family cheered. And Dominique was the sister who had always wanted whatever was mine. But the invitation itself was not the true insult. The insult was the handwritten note tucked neatly behind it. Dominique had written it in her signature purple ink. Simone, I know things ended messily between you and Trey, but he and I found our soulmates in each other. We are family, and family supports family no matter what. Please come witness true love. Wear something understated. Understated. That was her polite way of telling me to blend into the background, to disappear so she could shine in the spotlight she had stolen. I stood there in the lobby staring at the purple ink, feeling the familiar weight of being the family scapegoat pressing down on my shoulders. For as long as I could remember, my role in our family was to be the foundation that everyone else stepped on to elevate themselves. If I achieved something, it was downplayed. If Dominique wanted something, the earth was moved to give it to her. I was the reliable one, the one with the steady income and the sensible career, the one who was expected to absorb the blows and keep moving forward without making a scene. Just as I crushed the note in my fist, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The caller ID flashed a photo of my mother, Patricia. I took a deep breath, composing my voice, masking the swirling hurricane of betrayal and rage. I swiped answer, fully expecting a delicate, perhaps guilty conversation about the invitation. I was foolish to expect anything resembling empathy from her. Simone, tell me you got the mail, my mother demanded the second the call connected. No, hello? No asking how my day was going. Just a demand. Yes, Mom, I got it, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Good. Patricia sighed sharply into the receiver. Listen, Trey is family now, and you know your sister has completely maxed out all of her credit cards on the floral arrangements and the dress. She deserves a beautiful day after all the stress she has been under. The catering bill is $15,000, and I need you to wire the money to the venue by tomorrow morning. I actually laughed. A harsh, dry sound that echoed in the empty lobby. You want me to pay $15,000 for the wedding of the man who cheated on me with my own sister? Patricia, voice immediately dropped an octave, shifting into the sharp, disappointed tone she always used to discipline me when I was a child. Do not be bitter, Simone. You always were too focused on your spreadsheets and your career to keep a man happy. Trey needed someone with warmth and passion. Just pay the caterer like a good big sister. You owe Dominique anyway. You completely ruined her sweet 16 party by getting your college acceptance letters on the same weekend and stealing her thunder. It is the least you can do." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. She was actually blaming me for Trey cheating and demanding I fund the celebration of my own humiliation. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply looked at the crumpled purple note in my hand and made a decision. I would not be their victim anymore. "I will see what I can do, Mom," I said softly, and ended the call. I was going to that wedding, but I was not going to sit in the back. The very next evening was the official engagement dinner. Patricia had booked a private dining room at an overly expensive downtown restaurant that Trey could never afford on his own. I knew walking into that room would be like walking into a lion enclosure wearing a raw steak. But as a fraud investigator, my job is to gather evidence before closing the trap. I needed to see them. I needed to see exactly how comfortable they were in their betrayal. I arrived exactly 15 minutes late. The hostess guided me through the arched mahogany doors into the private suite. The room was already buzzing with the clinking of champagne glasses and the loud, obnoxious laughter of Trey and his fraternity brothers. The moment I stepped inside, the noise dropped by half. A dozen heads turned in my direction. I could feel the collective gaze of my extended family raking over me. Aunt Renee stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open. Uncle Calvin suddenly found the pattern on his silk tie incredibly interesting. They were all waiting for the jilted older sister to break down. They wanted a show. I refused to give them one. I wore a tailored emerald green suit that fit me perfectly. My hair was flawlessly styled and my makeup was immaculate. I did not look like a woman who had been discarded. I looked like a woman who owned the building. I walked straight over to the bar, ordered a sparkling water with lime, and turned to face the room. Across the sea of uncomfortable faces, I spotted them. Dominique was wearing a white cocktail dress that looked suspiciously like a bridal gown. She was clinging to Trey's arm like a shiny new accessory. Trey was wearing a tailored navy suit I had bought him for his birthday last year. The absolute nerve of this man. As soon as Dominique saw me, her fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second before stretching even wider. She practically dragged Trey across the Persian rug toward me. "Simone, you made it?" Dominique squealed, leaning in to air kiss my cheeks. She intentionally brought her left hand up to brush my shoulder, making sure the massive 3-carat diamond ring caught the light from the chandelier above us. "I am so glad you decided to be the bigger person and come celebrate us." Trey stood slightly behind her, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He could not even meet my eyes. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes and muttered a quick thanks for coming, Simone. I smiled warmly, a completely hollow, calculated smile. "I would not miss this for the world, Dominique. The ring is beautiful." How did Trey manage to afford a 3-carat diamond on a startup salary? Trey flinched visibly. Dominique rushed to fill the silence, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know, Trey is brilliant. His business is taking off, and we are just so blessed." Before I could press further, the sharp clinking of a silver spoon against crystal cut through the tension. Patricia was standing at the head of the long banquet table, raising her champagne flute. She wore a smug, triumphant expression. "Everyone, please take your seats," Patricia announced, her voice projecting across the room. "It is time for a toast." I took my assigned seat, which of course was situated near the swinging kitchen doors far away from the head of the table. I sat perfectly straight, folding my hands in my lap as the waiter poured champagne. Patricia cleared her throat and smiled lovingly at Dominique and Trey. "Family and friends, we are gathered here tonight to celebrate a union that we all knew was meant to be. Dominique, my beautiful baby girl, you have always been the light of this family. And Trey, we are so thrilled to officially welcome you into the fold." She paused, letting her eyes drag deliberately down the length of the table until they locked onto me. The room went completely still. "We are so glad Trey finally found a woman who knows how to be a real wife," Patricia said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "A man needs warmth. He needs passion. He needs a partner who puts him first, instead of a woman who treats her relationships like business audits and spends her nights staring at spreadsheets. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Aunt Renee covered her mouth. Beside Patricia, my father James simply chuckled, taking a long sip of his bourbon. He had always enabled her cruelty, never once standing up for me. The public humiliation was intentional. It was designed to break me, to force me to run out of the restaurant in tears so they could all shake their heads and call me unstable. I did not break. I picked up my glass of sparkling water, raised it slightly toward my mother, and took a slow, elegant sip. The lack of reaction seemed to agitate Dominique. She needed me to be the villain so she could play the victim. Dominique stood up, holding her champagne glass. "Thank you, Mom," she said, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. "And since we are talking about family coming together, Trey and I have an announcement. We were looking at houses, but the market is just so crazy right now, so we decided that the best place to start our family would be grandmother's brownstone." My eyes narrowed a fraction of an inch. The brownstone in the city was left entirely to me when my grandmother passed away 5 years ago. It was legally mine. Not my parents', not Dominique. Mine. Dominique turned directly to me, planting her hands on the table. "So Simone, since you are going to be single forever anyway, and you really do not need all that space for just one person, we thought it would make the perfect wedding gift. You can just sign the deed over to us next week. It is what grandmother would have wanted. She always loved family." The sheer entitlement echoed in the silent dining room. They were not asking. They were demanding my multi-million-dollar property as a reward for their betrayal. My mother nodded in agreement. My father looked expectantly at me. They all waited for me to explode, to yell, to cause a scene that would justify their terrible treatment of me. Instead, I let the silence stretch. I let it become heavy and suffocating. I looked at Trey, who was suddenly sweating under the collar of the suit I bought him. I looked at Dominique, whose desperate need for validation was practically radiating off her skin. And then I smiled. A genuine, chilling smile. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the white tablecloth. "I will make sure you get exactly what you deserve for your wedding, Dom," I said, my voice perfectly calm and smooth. Dominique beamed, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Simone, thank you. I knew you would understand." The family let out a collective sigh of relief, thinking the scapegoat had submitted once again. The dinner resumed with loud chatter and clinking glasses. They thought they had won. They had no idea that while they were eating their roasted duck and caviar, I was already planning the forensic accounting investigation that would destroy their lives. The moment I returned to my apartment that night, I went straight to my home office. I bypassed the light switch, leaving the room illuminated only by the harsh glow of my 3 computer monitors. I booted up my secure terminal and logged into the databases I used for work. Something about Trey having a sudden influx of cash to buy a 3-carat diamond ring while allegedly struggling with a startup company set off every professional alarm bell in my head. Math does not lie. And Trey's math was not making any sense. I started with public records. I ran a basic credit sweep on Trey, using the information I still had from when we applied for an apartment together 2 years ago. The results populated on my screen in seconds. My jaw tightened as I scrolled through the data. Trey had 6 maxed-out credit cards, 2 accounts in collections, and tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid parking tickets and municipal fines. He was drowning in debt. There was absolutely no way he legally financed that diamond ring or the expensive suits he had been parading around in. But that was just the surface. I dug deeper. I pulled the corporate filings for his so-called startup company. It was registered as an LLC in Delaware, but the business address was a cheap P.O. box in a strip mall. No employees, no revenue history, just a shell company. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing screens. If he had no money and horrible credit, how was he funding this lavish wedding lifestyle? How was Dominique maxing out credit cards when she only worked part-time at a boutique? I pulled up my own credit report. It was a routine check, something I did every quarter out of habit. But this time, when the page loaded, my blood ran cold. There was a massive bright red flag glaring at me from the screen. A new business loan had been opened 6 months ago. The exact time Trey claimed his startup was finally getting off the ground. The loan was for $150,000, and it was taken out under my social security number. My hands started to shake as I clicked into the detailed loan origination documents. I downloaded the PDF and zoomed in on the signature line. Someone had forged my signature, but it was not a clumsy forgery. It was a perfect replica of my handwriting. The kind of replica only someone who had lived with me, someone who had access to my old notebooks and tax documents could pull off. Dominique. I felt a physical wave of nausea wash over me. My own sister and my fiancé had stolen my identity. But the horror did not stop there. As I read through the collateral section of the loan agreement, I stopped breathing completely. They had not just taken out an unsecured loan, they had used my grandmother's brownstone, the property I legally owned outright, as collateral to secure the $150,000. If they defaulted on this fraudulent loan, the bank would foreclose on my home. They were not just stealing my fiancé, they were trying to steal my entire financial future and leave me homeless while they played house in my property. The betrayal was so deep, so malicious, that it pushed past anger and settled into a state of absolute icy clarity. The crying was over. The hurt was gone. Now it was purely business. I did not call the police. Calling the police right now would tip them off. It would give Trey time to destroy documents, and Dominique time to run crying to our mother to hire a defense attorney. No, I needed to trap them so completely that they could never escape. The next morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I was sitting in the sleek glass conference room of my lawyer's office ready to flip the board. My attorney, Kenneth, sat across the polished mahogany table of his downtown office reviewing the loan documents. I had brought him the digital files, the forged signatures, and the property deed. He looked up, adjusting his heavy framed glasses. His expression was a mix of professional shock and deep concern. "Simone, this is a textbook felony," he said, tapping the paper. "They used your social security number to secure $150,000. We can have them arrested before noon." I shook my head, leaning forward in my leather chair. "No," I replied, my voice completely calm and measured. "Arresting them now is too easy. If Trey goes to jail today, Dominique plays the victim. My parents will hire a defense attorney to bail him out and spin a story about a banking error. I want the debt, Kenneth. I want to own it entirely." Kenneth understood my strategy immediately. As a financial fraud investigator, I knew the obscure loopholes of commercial banking better than anyone in my family. Instead of flagging the loan as fraudulent and launching a lengthy police investigation that would freeze my property, I decided to execute a legal and quiet buyout. Using my own liquid assets from years of smart investing, I instructed Kenneth to approach the lending bank on behalf of a private holding company I owned. We offered to purchase the commercial note in full. The bank was thrilled to offload a high-risk, unverified startup loan without any collection hassle. Within 48 hours, the paperwork was signed, sealed, and legally binding. Trey and Dominique thought they owed a massive debt to a faceless corporate banking institution. They had absolutely no idea that their entire financial future was now legally owned by me. I was their sole creditor. If they missed a single payment, I had the legal authority to foreclose on the loan and seize everything they owned. The trap was perfectly set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk right into it. 2 weeks passed in a blur of fake pleasantries and passive-aggressive text messages from my mother. Then came the rehearsal dinner. Dominique had insisted on hosting it at an upscale, pretentious country club on the wealthy outskirts of the city. I arrived wearing a sleek charcoal dress that screamed silent luxury, true to form. Dominique had orchestrated every single detail to ensure I felt as uncomfortable and marginalized as possible. When the hostess led me to my assigned seat, I actually had to suppress a laugh. I was placed at a tiny wobbly table shoved into the darkest corner of the banquet hall, right next to the swinging kitchen doors. My dining companions were three of Trey's loudest, most obnoxious fraternity brothers and my Aunt Denise. Aunt Denise spent the first 20 minutes of the meal offering me unsolicited prayers for my season of loneliness and asking if I had considered joining a church singles group. Every time a waiter pushed through the heavy wooden kitchen doors, they bumped the back of my chair. It was a calculated physical reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. Across the room, Dominique sat at the center of the head table, glowing under the warm pendant lights, holding court like a queen among her loyal subjects. My mother, Patricia, fluttered around her, making sure every wineglass was full, every napkin was perfectly folded, and every guest knew how perfect the couple was. Not once did my parents look in my direction. I sat there calmly eating my heavily overcooked salmon, letting them enjoy their false sense of superiority. They thought they had buried me. They did not know I was a seed ready to break the concrete. Halfway through the endless toasts, I excused myself to use the restroom. The hallway leading to the women's room was long, dimly lit, and lined with heavy velvet curtains. The loud thumping music from the banquet hall faded into a low, distant hum. I washed my hands, checked my lipstick in the mirror, and turned to leave. When I opened the restroom door, I stopped cold in my tracks. Trey was leaning heavily against the wall directly in my path. He had a glass of amber whiskey in one hand and a smug, arrogant grin plastered on his face. He stepped forward, physically blocking the narrow corridor. "Well, if it is not my favorite investigator," Trey drawled his words, slurring slightly from the expensive alcohol. "You look good, Simone. Really good. That charcoal dress is doing you a lot of favors." "Move, Trey," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. I made a mental note of how pathetic he looked up close. The expensive tailored suit could not hide the desperate, nervous sweat forming on his forehead. "Come on, Simone, do not be like that," he whispered, taking another step closer, crowding my personal space. "You know I did not want things to happen this way. Your mother was constantly in my ear pushing the timeline and Dominique just threw herself at me. It just happened. But you and I both know she is exhausting. She needs constant validation and attention. She is literally like a child." My investigative instincts kicked in instantly. I knew exactly what kind of opportunistic man Trey was. He was a textbook narcissist, looking for an escape hatch before the wedding even happened. Without breaking eye contact or changing my facial expression, I subtly slid my hand into my small leather clutch. My fingers found the smooth glass of my smartphone. With one practiced covert motion, I unlocked the screen and hit the record button on my voice memo app. I let my shoulders drop, pretending to look vulnerable and willing to listen. "If she is so exhausting, why are you marrying her tomorrow, Trey?" I asked, keeping my tone soft and curious. Trey let out a short, bitter laugh, taking a large gulp of his whiskey. "Because of the family trust fund, Simone. You know exactly how this works. Your father is basically handing me the keys to the kingdom once the ink is dry on the marriage certificate. I give it a year, maybe 18 months tops. I will drain those joint accounts, deal with her whining for a bit, and then I am out. But that does not mean you and I cannot still have fun. We always had a great connection in the bedroom. We could still hook up on the side. Nobody has to know a thing." The sheer audacity of his proposition was almost beautiful. It was the final absolute nail in his coffin, and he had just gleefully hammered it in himself. I smiled. It was not a warm smile, but Trey was far too drunk and arrogant to notice the danger flashing in my eyes. I secured my phone back in my clutch, knowing the audio file was perfectly clear and safely stored in the cloud. "Is that so, Trey?" I asked softly. "Yeah." He smiled, a greasy, confident smile, reaching out to touch my bare arm. "We can have the best of both worlds, Simone." I stepped back smoothly, dodging his hand. "I think you are going to get exactly the world you deserve tomorrow, Trey," I said. I brushed past him, walking down the hallway back toward the deafening noise of the banquet hall. I did not look back. He was a dead man walking, and he was completely oblivious to the execution waiting for him at the altar. Seil. The waiters quietly moved around the long mahogany table, clearing away the empty appetizer plates. The ambient chatter in the private dining room was loud, a mix of forced laughter and the clinking of heavy silverware. I sat quietly in my assigned seat near the kitchen doors, observing the dynamics of the room like a crime scene. Dominique was holding court at the center of the table, her hand resting aggressively on Trey's arm, making sure the 3-carat diamond ring caught the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. I watched Trey. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting in his tailored suit, drinking his whiskey a little too fast. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of silver against crystal cut through the noise. My mother, Patricia, was standing at the head of the table, a half-empty champagne flute in her hand. A proud, radiant smile stretched across her perfectly made-up face. She waited until every single conversation in the room stopped, and all eyes were on her. Family and friends. Patricia began, her voice projecting effortlessly across the room. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate something truly special. We are here to celebrate love in its purest form. She paused, letting her eyes sweep over the guests before resting warmly on my sister. Dominique, my beautiful baby girl. From the moment you were born, you brought a special kind of light into this family. You have always been the heart of our home, and watching you find your soulmate has been the greatest joy of my life. Dominique beamed, leaning her head on Trey's shoulder, playing the role of the blushing bride to perfection. The extended family murmured their agreement, raising their glasses slightly. And Trey Patricia continued, her tone shifting into something thick with manufactured emotion. We are so thrilled to officially welcome you into the fold. You have been a part of this family for a while now, but seeing you with Dominique, seeing how you protect her and cherish her, makes it all make sense. I knew my mother better than anyone. I recognized the slight change in her posture, the subtle narrowing of her eyes. The sweet part of the speech was over. It was time for the performance she had really stood up to give. It was time to put the scapegoat in her place. Patricia slowly turned her head. Her gaze bypassed the aunts, the uncles, and the frat brothers, locking directly onto me at the far end of the table. The smile on her face did not reach her cold eyes. We are so glad Trey finally found a woman who knows how to be a real wife, Patricia said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet venom. A man needs warmth. He needs passion. He needs a partner who puts his needs first instead of a woman who treats her relationships like business audits. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The silence in the dining room was absolute. Even the waiters seemed to freeze in place. Patricia did not look away. She doubled down. It takes a soft, nurturing woman to build a home, Simone. Not someone who spends her nights staring at spreadsheets and treating her family like liabilities on a balance sheet. Trey needed a real woman, and we are just so grateful he found one in your sister. A collective, uncomfortable gasp rippled through the room. Aunt Denise covered her mouth with her napkin. Uncle Calvin suddenly found the pattern on the tablecloth incredibly fascinating. They were all waiting for my reaction. They were waiting for my armor to crack. Beside Patricia, my father James shifted in his seat. Instead of stepping in, instead of defending his eldest daughter from a cruel, unprovoked public attack, he simply shook his head, took a long sip of his bourbon, and chuckled. It was a low, cowardly sound. He had always been the enabler. Growing up, whenever Patricia would tear me down to build Dominique up, James would just look away. When I graduated at the top of my university class, and my mother refused to attend because Dominique had a minor cheerleading competition, my father just handed me a $50 bill and told me to stop being so sensitive. His chuckle right now was his way of validating my mother's cruelty, keeping the peace in his marriage at the expense of my dignity. They all wanted a show. They wanted the jilted older sister to burst into tears. They wanted me to yell, to throw my drink, to storm out of the restaurant so they could spend the rest of the evening shaking their heads and whispering about how unstable and bitter I was. They needed me to be the villain so Dominique and Trey could be the undisputed victims of my jealousy. I refused to give them the satisfaction. As a financial fraud investigator, I have sat across the table from corporate embezzlers, pathological liars, and desperate criminals. I know how to control a room by doing absolutely nothing. I kept my breathing steady. I kept my shoulders relaxed. I maintained a stone-cold, impenetrable composure. I reached out with a steady hand, picked up my glass of sparkling water, and raised it slightly in my mother's direction. I offered her a small, chillingly calm smile. The kind of smile a predator gives right before the trap snaps shut. I took a slow, elegant sip of my water and gently set the glass back down on the table without making a single sound. My lack of reaction seemed to suck the oxygen right out of Patricia's lungs. Her smug, triumphant expression faltered. She blinked, her hand trembling just a fraction of an inch around her champagne flute. She had fired her best shot, and it had bounced right off me. Dominique shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her grand moment of victory was being ruined by my absolute silence. She needed me to break so she could feel superior. Trey refused to look in my direction altogether, keeping his eyes firmly glued to his empty plate. He knew exactly what I was capable of, and my silence terrified him far more than any screaming match ever could. To everyone else in the room, I looked like a woman who had simply accepted defeat. But behind my calm exterior, my mind was working at lightning speed. Every cruel word my mother spoke, every cowardly chuckle from my father, every smug look from my sister was being carefully catalogued. They thought this dinner was a victory lap. They thought they had successfully humiliated me into submission. They did not realize that I was studying them, memorizing their arrogance so I could use it against them later. Patricia cleared her throat awkwardly, the silence stretching a few seconds too long. Well, to the happy couple, she finished hastily, her voice losing its previous theatrical flair. To the happy couple, the room echoed weakly, raising their glasses in a disjointed chorus. I did not touch my glass again. I simply sat there watching the facade of their perfect family begin to crack under the weight of my indifference. The dinner was far from over, and I knew Dominique could not stand being ignored. She was going to try again. She was going to push harder to get a reaction out of me, and I was more than ready for whatever trap she thought she was setting next. The dinner conversation had resumed, flowing around me like a polluted river. Dominique bathed in the afterglow of my mother toast, and my apparent submission was practically vibrating with toxic energy. She was high on the power of the room, high on the validation she drew from putting me down. She reached out and patted Trey's hand, her 3-carat ring catching the light once again. He offered a strained smile, his eyes darting toward me before quickly looking away. He knew something was wrong. He could sense the shift in the atmosphere, even if Dominique was completely oblivious. Suddenly, Dominique clapped her hands together, leaning forward across the table. Her eyes were bright with a manic kind of excitement. She had won the battle, but she wanted to utterly decimate me. You know, Simone, she started, her voice carrying over the low hum of conversation. Since we are all here and we are talking about the future, I had an idea. A really great idea. I slowly turned my head to look at her, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. What kind of idea, Dominique? I asked softly. She flashed a brilliant manufactured smile. Well, Trey and I have been looking at houses. We really want to start our family soon, and you know the market is just so difficult right now. It is impossible to find anything suitable in the city. I waited, not offering her any help or encouragement. The silence stretched, forcing her to continue. And then I realized she said, her smile widening into something almost feral. We already have the perfect family home, Grandmother Brownstone. It is just sitting there. And since you are going to be single forever anyway, you really do not need all that space for just one person. It is honestly a little sad for you to rattle around in that big house all alone. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. The brownstone had been left exclusively to me by my grandmother, a woman who had seen through my mother's manipulation and Dominique's selfishness. It was a multi-million-dollar property completely paid off legally in my name, and Dominique was publicly demanding it as a wedding present. I think it would be the perfect wedding gift, Dominique declared, crossing her arms and leaning back as if the matter were already settled. You can just sign the deed over to us next week. It is what grandmother would have wanted. She always loved family. The dining room fell silent again. This time the tension was palpable. Even my enabling father James stopped mid-sip, staring at me with a look of expectant pressure. My mother, Patricia, nodded enthusiastically. Her eyes locked on me, daring me to refuse. They were waiting for me to explode, to scream about how unfair it was to cause the scene that would finally cement my status as the crazy, jealous sister. I looked at Dominique. Her face was flushed with triumph. She really believed she had won. She really believed she could just take whatever I had built, whatever I owned, simply because she demanded it. She thought my silence over the past few weeks was surrender. She had no idea it was strategy. I did not raise my voice. I did not glare. I picked up my glass of red wine, swirling the dark liquid thoughtfully. I brought the rim to my lips, took a slow, deliberate sip, and swallowed. The wine was rich and heavy, coating my throat. I lowered the glass, setting it softly on the white tablecloth. I looked directly into Dominique's eyes. "I will make sure you get exactly what you deserve for your wedding, Dom," I said. My voice was chillingly calm, a smooth, quiet promise that cut through the silence like a scalpel. Dominique's face erupted into a massive, triumphant grin. She clapped her hands together, letting out a short squeal of delight. "Oh, Simone, thank you. I knew you would understand. It is going to be so perfect. I already have ideas for remodeling the kitchen." My mother let out a loud, exaggerated sigh of relief, patting my father's arm. "See, James? I told you she would come around. Family takes care of family." Aunt Denise nodded approvingly, leaning across the table. "It is the Christian thing to do, Simone. The Lord will reward your generosity." The entire table erupted into relieved chatter, the tension evaporating in an instant. They took my words as total submission. They believed I had finally broken under the weight of their collective pressure, that I was handing over my most valuable asset just to buy their conditional love and peace. Trey, however, was not celebrating. He was staring at me, his face pale, the forced smile completely gone from his lips. He was the only one in the room who understood the danger in my calm demeanor. He had seen me dismantle corporate executives during investigations, stripping away their lies until they were left with nothing. He knew that I never promised anything I did not intend to deliver. And he knew deep down that what they truly deserved was not a multi-million-dollar brownstone. I picked up my fork and took a small bite of my dinner, chewing slowly. My mind was already leagues ahead of them. They wanted the brownstone. They thought they were entitled to it. They had no idea that I already held the deed, the mortgage, and the full legal power to crush them. The engagement dinner was a resounding success as far as my family was concerned. They ate their expensive desserts, drank their vintage champagne, and toasted to the happy couple, oblivious to the fact that they were dancing on the edge of a cliff, and I was the one holding the remote detonator. When the dinner finally concluded, I politely kissed my mother on the cheek, offered a brief nod to my father, and wished Dominique a beautiful night. I walked out of the restaurant, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement, sliding into the back of my waiting car. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the toxic facade of my family behind. The real estate trap was set perfectly. Dominique's arrogance had given me the exact opening I needed. She wanted the brownstone so badly she was willing to publicly demand it. I was going to use that greed to hang her. As the car navigated the city streets, I pulled out my phone and sent a brief encrypted message to my lawyer, Kenneth. The dinner went exactly as planned. "Begin the transfer process for the loan. I want full control of the debt by Monday morning." Kenneth's reply came through less than a minute later. "Received. The paperwork is ready for your signature. Have a good night, Simone." I locked my phone and leaned back against the leather seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. The engagement dinner was over. The pleasantries were finished. Now the real work began. I was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece, contract by contract, and I was going to do it completely legally. When I stepped through the front door of my home, the silence was a welcome relief from the toxic noise of the restaurant. I dropped my keys on the console table, kicked off my heels, and walked straight into my home office. I had already authorized Kenneth to begin the legal transfer of the fraudulent loan, but owning the debt was only the first half of my strategy. If I was going to stand up in the middle of a packed cathedral and destroy my family perfect facade, I needed more than just a foreclosure notice. I needed a flawless, irrefutable paper trail. I needed to know exactly where every single cent of that $150,000 went. As a seasoned financial fraud investigator, I have dismantled international embezzlers and corporate money launderers. Taking apart Trey and Dominique was going to be child play. I bypassed the overhead light switch and sat down at my massive glass desk. The room was illuminated only by the harsh blue glow of my 3 computer monitors. I cracked my knuckles and logged into my secure investigative terminal. My professional instincts had been screaming at me all night. Trey Math was simply not mathing. He had been parading around the engagement dinner in a bespoke navy suit, flashing an expensive watch and buying top-shelf whiskey. Yet he claimed his tech startup was still in its early developmental phases. Real tech founders in the early stages do not wear custom suits. They wear cheap hoodies and sleep under their desks because they are bleeding capital. Trey was bleeding capital too, but he was doing it to fund his ego. I started with the absolute basics. I accessed the public corporate registry for the state of Delaware where Trey claimed his startup was headquartered. I typed in the name of his company. The search results populated in less than 2 seconds. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, as I read through the incorporation documents. Just as I suspected, it was a complete ghost ship. The business address was not a sleek office building in a tech hub. It was a cheap virtual post office box located in a run-down strip mall. There were no listed employees other than Trey. There was no board of directors. There was no actual product. He had filed the paperwork for a limited liability company solely to create a legitimate-looking entity to receive the loan he stole using my identity. I shook my head, letting out a harsh breath. He was not just arrogant, he was incredibly stupid. Next, I moved on to his public credit history. Because Trey and I had once applied for an apartment lease together, I still had his basic identifying information securely stored in my files. I ran a soft pull on his credit utilizing a legal loophole available to licensed investigators conducting background asset checks. The data cascaded down my center monitor, painting a pathetic picture of a man drowning in his own lies. Trey's credit score was practically non-existent. He had 6 different credit cards, all completely maxed out to their limits. 2 of those accounts had already been sent to third-party collection agencies. He had a trail of unpaid municipal fines over $3,000 just in parking tickets and late fees. There was absolutely zero chance any reputable banking institution would have approved him for a loan to buy a used car, let alone a 6-figure commercial startup loan. That was why he needed my social security number. That was why he forged my signature and used my grandmother brownstone as collateral. He was a financial parasite looking for a host, and when I kicked him out, Dominique eagerly opened the door. But I needed to connect the dots between the stolen money and their current lavish lifestyle. I needed to prove that Dominique was not just a naive bride, but an active, willing participant in federal identity theft. I pulled up the routing information attached to the fraudulent commercial loan. Using my forensic accounting software, I began to trace the wire transfers originating from Trey Dummy Corporation. Following the money is an art form. Criminals always think they can hide cash by moving it quickly, but digital money always leaves footprints in the snow. The first major wire transfer happened exactly 3 days after the loan funds were deposited into Trey's account. It was a direct payment of $22,000 to an exclusive high-end jeweler in the Diamond District. I pulled up the jeweler website on my right monitor and compared it to the photos Dominique had posted on her social media. There it was, the 3-carat emerald-cut diamond ring she had practically shoved in my face at the dinner table. My sister was wearing $22,000 of stolen money on her left ring finger. I documented the transfer, taking a high-resolution screenshot and saving it to a heavily encrypted master file on my desktop. I labeled the file the kill shot. I kept tracing the funds. The next outgoing wire was for $14,000, directed to a luxury car dealership. Trey had leased a high-end European sports car, paying the first year entirely upfront in cash to avoid a credit check. That explained how he was suddenly driving a vehicle he had no business sitting in. But the most damning piece of evidence, the piece that completely sealed Dominique's fate, appeared near the bottom of the ledger. 2 months ago, Trey initiated a direct wire transfer of $35,000. The receiving account was not a vendor or a business expense. It was a personal checking account. I ran a quick verification on the account number. It belonged to Dominique. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling the transaction history of Dominique's account to see exactly how she spent the stolen funds. It was a masterclass in frivolous narcissism. She had used my stolen money to pay off her own maxed-out credit cards. She had paid the non-refundable deposits for the cathedral, the floral arrangements, and the caterer. She had even purchased her custom bridal gown using funds that were legally tied to my name and my property. She knew. Dominique knew exactly where the money came from. Trey could not have hidden a $150,000 windfall from her, especially when he was actively transferring tens of thousands of dollars directly into her bank account. She knew they had forged my signature. She knew they had put a lien on the brownstone our grandmother left me. She sat across from me at the engagement dinner, demanding I give her the house as a wedding gift, knowing full well she had already stolen the equity out from under it. A cold, dark sense of satisfaction settled deep in my chest. If there had been any lingering sliver of guilt inside me about ruining her special day, it evaporated completely. They had weaponized my identity to fund their dream wedding, and they intended to leave me holding the bag when the bank inevitably came to collect. I spent the next 3 hours meticulously organizing the digital paper trail. I compiled the incorporation documents proving the business was a fraud. I gathered the wire transfer receipts proving exactly what they purchased. I saved the forensic analysis of the forged signatures on the loan origination papers. I printed hard copies of every single document, organizing them into a thick, heavy legal folder. Then I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. I copied the entire digital dossier onto the drive. I also added the audio recording I had secretly captured in the hallway outside the restaurant restroom. The recording where Trey drunkenly admitted he was only marrying Dominique for our father trust fund and planned to drain her accounts before abandoning her. I held the small silver drive in the palm of my hand. It was virtually weightless, but it held the power to detonate my entire family structure. This was my secret weapon. This was the exact mechanism of their destruction. I looked at the clock glowing on the wall. It was nearly 3 in the morning. The city outside my window was quiet, sleeping under the glow of the streetlights. Tomorrow, Kenneth would finalize the purchase of the commercial loan, officially making me the sole owner of their massive debt. By the time Dominique walked down the aisle, she and her groom would be entirely legally at my mercy. I closed my laptop, plunging the home office into darkness. I felt more awake and more alive than I had in months. The jilted older sister narrative was officially dead. I was not the victim anymore. I was the executioner, and I was going to wear white to the funeral. The next morning, I walked into the towering glass lobby of the downtown commercial bank. The air conditioning was sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the warm city streets outside. Kenneth, my attorney, was already waiting for me near the marble security desk. He held a sleek leather briefcase and wore a deeply serious expression. Today was the day we officially executed the private acquisition of the fraudulent loan. But before I signed the final transfer papers authorizing my holding company to take over the massive debt, I needed to see the physical origination file. Digital files on my computer screen were one thing, but I needed to hold the actual paper they had signed. I needed to see the physical evidence of their betrayal with my own eyes. The regional bank manager escorted Kenneth and me into a private glass-walled boardroom. He seemed relieved to be getting rid of the commercial note. Banks hate high-risk, unverified startup loans, and my holding company was paying the balance in full to take it off their hands. The manager slid a thick manila folder across the polished mahogany table and quietly stepped out of the room to give us privacy. I opened the folder and spread the documents out across the smooth table. Seeing the physical blue ink on the heavy white paper brought a chilling new level of reality to the crime. There it was in black and white. My legal name, my social security number. My grandmother brownstone listed right there on the secondary page as the primary collateral for the $150,000. And at the bottom of the final page, a perfect forgery of my signature. As a seasoned financial fraud investigator, I do not just look at a crime. I reconstruct exactly how it was committed. I stared at the curves and loops of the forged signature, and my mind immediately flashed back to a specific afternoon 4 months ago. Dominique had come over to my house completely unannounced. She claimed she was in the neighborhood and desperately needed to use my laser printer for some high-resolution bridal shower invitations. I had been in the kitchen making us iced lattes. My home office door had been wide open. My tax returns and property deeds were locked in a secure filing cabinet, but I always kept a spare master key tucked inside the top drawer of my desk. I remembered how long she had taken in that room. I remembered walking in and seeing her quickly shut the desk drawer, a nervous, guilty smile plastered on her face. She had deliberately invaded my sanctuary. She had dug through my private financial records, copied my social security number, and photographed the property deed to the brownstone. She had looked me right in the eyes, drank the coffee I made for her, and thanked me for being such a supportive sister, all while stealing my identity. But as I continued to flip through the heavy stack of legal documents, another glaring issue caught my attention. Dominique and Trey could not have executed a commercial property lien completely on their own. The bank required a certified notary public to verify the identity of the person signing the collateral agreement. They needed an official witness to confirm that I was the one holding the pen. I flipped to the final page of the deed transfer document. There, right next to my forged signature, was a bright red circular notary stamp. I leaned in closely, reading the name engraved in the red ink. It belonged to Jamal. Jamal was one of Trey's loud, obnoxious fraternity brothers. He was the same man who had been sitting right next to me at the rehearsal dinner, drinking expensive beer and laughing at my mother-toxic toast. Jamal was a licensed public notary, and he had illegally stamped a forged document allowing Trey to steal $150,000. This was not just a crime of convenience or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a highly coordinated criminal conspiracy involving multiple people. Kenneth leaned over my shoulder, looking at the red stamp. He adjusted his glasses, letting out a low whistle. "They really thought they were untouchable," Kenneth murmured. "Using a friend to notarize a forged document on a six-figure federal bank loan is a guaranteed prison sentence, Simone. This is a massive felony." Staring at that red stamp, the last remaining fragments of my familial obligation completely evaporated. The sheer audacity of the crime shifted the entire narrative in my mind. This was no longer a story about a romantic betrayal. Trey cheating on me with my sister was painful, but it was just petty emotional cruelty. This was different. This was a calculated legal war. They had conspired to ruin me financially. If Trey's fake startup failed, which it absolutely would, the bank would have legally seized my brownstone. The bank would have auctioned off the only property I had left from my grandmother, the only true sanctuary I had away from my toxic family. I would have been evicted from my own home with my credit entirely destroyed. Dominique knew this. She understood the catastrophic financial ruin this would cause me, and she did it anyway. She risked my entire future just so she could wear a custom designer dress and parade around with a 3-carat diamond ring on her finger. The betrayal was so absolute, so deeply malicious, that it burned away any lingering sadness I had over the end of my relationship with Trey. I did not care that he was marrying her. They were two parasites who absolutely deserved each other. I looked up at Kenneth and gave him a sharp, definitive nod. "Let us finish this," I said, my voice steady and cold. Kenneth pulled the final transfer authorization papers from his briefcase. I picked up a heavy gold pen from the center of the table and signed my real signature with a sharp, decisive stroke. We called the regional manager back into the boardroom. He reviewed the signatures, stamped the transfer, and shook our hands. It was officially done. The bank was completely out of the picture. The private holding company that I solely owned was now the absolute legal creditor for the $150,000 loan. Trey and Dominique officially owed me their entire lives, and they had absolutely no idea. Kenneth packed his briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut. "I will have the formal foreclosure notices and the civil lawsuit papers drafted by this afternoon, Simone," he said. "Everything will be ready for you by tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Kenneth," I replied, turning to walk out of the glass room. "Make sure the papers are printed on heavy stock. I want them to feel the weight of what they did." As I walked out of the bank and stepped into the bright, bustling city streets, my phone buzzed inside my leather purse. I pulled it out and looked at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Dominique. "Hey Simone, just a reminder that the bridesmaids' luncheon is tomorrow at noon. Please wear pastel colors so you do not clash with the aesthetic of my photos. And do not forget to bring the deed to the brownstone. We really need to get the remodeling started right after the honeymoon. Love you." I stood on the crowded sidewalk staring at the message. The staggering entitlement was almost comical. She was sitting in a luxury apartment paid for by my stolen identity, demanding I hand over the house she had already secretly mortgaged. She was playing the role of the stressed, demanding bride, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just committed a federal felony against the one person who could destroy her. I did not feel angry anymore. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a massive storm makes landfall. I typed a quick, simple reply. "I have everything prepared for the wedding, Dom. See you tomorrow." I locked my phone, dropped it back into my purse, and hailed a cab. The investigation was over. The trap was fully armed. All that was left to do was attend the wedding and burn their perfect fake world to the ground. As the cab navigated through the heavy downtown traffic, my mind was entirely focused on the mechanics of the trap I had just armed. Liquidating $150,000 might sound like a massive undertaking to a normal person, but for me, it was nothing more than a routine phone call. 5 years ago, I established a private limited liability company called Meridian Holdings to manage my personal investment portfolio. While my family thought I was just a boring auditor staring at spreadsheets, I had been quietly building substantial wealth. I called my wealth manager from the back seat of the cab and instructed him to transfer the funds. He did not ask questions. By the time the cab pulled up to my apartment building, the wire transfer had already cleared the commercial bank. The sheer beauty of the setup was its absolute secrecy. When Trey and Dominique signed that fraudulent loan, they believed they were borrowing from a massive, faceless financial institution. They assumed that if they defaulted, they would get automated warning letters and generic phone calls from a call center. They thought they would have months to negotiate or hide their assets before any real consequences arrived. They had absolutely no idea that Meridian Holdings was entirely owned and operated by me. I did not have a board of directors to consult. I did not have corporate grace periods. I was their sole creditor. The second I decided to call in the debt, their financial lives would be completely eradicated. Later that evening, a private courier arrived at my apartment. He handed me a thick leather portfolio from Kenneth. Inside were the finalized legal documents printed on heavy premium stock paper, exactly as I had requested. I spread them across my kitchen island, pouring myself a glass of expensive red wine. I read through the official notice of foreclosure. I reviewed the civil lawsuit for $150,000, citing felony identity theft and fraud. I even had a draft of the police report ready to be filed with the authorities. I traced my finger over the gold seal of my holding company. I was no longer the jilted older sister. I was the puppet master and my family was dancing on my stage. Instead of screaming or calling the police immediately, I had played chess, and I had just put them in checkmate. The next day at noon, I walked into the sunroom of an outrageously overpriced boutique hotel for the bridesmaid luncheon. True to Dominique instructions, I was wearing a tailored pastel blue dress. The room was dripping in white roses and tall crystal vases paid for entirely by the money they stole from me. Dominique was sitting at the head of a long table wearing a silk white pantsuit, laughing loudly with her friends. My mother Patricia was hovering behind her adjusting her hair and making sure the hired photographer captured her best angles. When I walked in, the laughter died down slightly. Dominique's friends offered me strained, polite smiles. They all knew the history. They all thought I was pathetically desperate for clinging to the family after my sister stole my fiancé. I took my seat quietly, placing my designer purse on the empty chair next to me. "Simone, you made it," Dominique said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "I was worried you might oversleep. You always work such crazy hours and you looked so tired the other night." "I would not miss this, Dom," I replied, offering a cool, composed smile. "The floral arrangements are stunning. They must have cost an absolute fortune." Dominique did not even flinch. She just waved her hand dismissively, her 3-carat ring flashing in the sunlight. "Oh, you know Trey wanted everything to be perfect. He has been doing so well lately with his business. We just decided not to spare any expense for our special day." It took every ounce of my professional restraint not to burst out laughing. She was bragging about spending my money while I sat right across from her holding her literal freedom in my hands. Patricia chimed in, pouring premium champagne into Dominique's glass. "Well, that is what happens when a man truly loves a woman," Patricia said, looking directly at me. "He provides. He makes sure she has the very best. It is a shame you never learned how to inspire that kind of generosity, Simone. Maybe if you catch the bouquet tomorrow, you will finally find a man who can handle your cold personality." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, letting the insult wash over me. A month ago, that comment would have stung. It would have sent me spiraling into self-doubt, wondering why I was never enough for my family. But today, it meant absolutely nothing. Their insults were empty because their entire reality was fake. Dominique leaned across the table, her eyes shining with greedy anticipation. "Speaking of generosity, Simone, did you bring the paperwork for the brownstone? Trey and I were looking at paint samples last night, and we really want to get the contractors in there the day we get back from our honeymoon. The kitchen is just so outdated." The entire table went completely silent. Her friends stared at me wide-eyed, clearly shocked by her blatant entitlement. Even Patricia stopped pouring the champagne, waiting eagerly for my answer. I reached into my purse and pulled out a beautiful cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. I slid it across the glass table until it rested right in front of Dominique. I did not give her the deed, of course. Inside that envelope was a generic, pre-written congratulations card. But she did not need to know that right now. "My lawyers are finalizing the final transfers," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional. "You will have everything you legally deserve on your wedding day, Dominique. I promise you that." Dominique's face lit up with absolute triumph. She snatched the envelope off the table and tucked it into her expensive handbag. She looked around at her friends, a smug, victorious grin plastered on her face. "Oh, Simone, you are the best sister ever. I knew you would come through for us and do the right thing." I smiled back, a genuine, chilling smile that did not reach my eyes. "Always, Dom. Family takes care of family, right?" The luncheon dragged on for another 2 hours, but I sat there in perfect peace. Let them eat their expensive caviar. Let them toast to their fake wealth. I had flipped the board entirely. They thought they were playing a game of emotional manipulation, but I was playing a game of high-stakes financial ruin. The trap was permanently locked, the massive debt was mine, and the rehearsal dinner was right around the corner where Trey was about to hand me the final piece of ammunition I needed. The rehearsal dinner took place the following evening at an exclusive country club located on the wealthy outskirts of the city. Dominique had rented out the entire grand ballroom with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a meticulously manicured golf course. When I walked through the double mahogany doors, I immediately recognized the extravagant floral centerpieces and the customized gold-plated menus. Every single detail of this opulent evening was being financed by the fraudulent commercial loan sitting in my name. I handed my coat to the attendant and walked over to the elegant seating chart displayed on a massive glass mirror near the entrance. I traced my finger down the alphabetical list of guests until I found my name. Simone. Table 12. I scanned the expansive ballroom locating table 12. It was not just in the back of the room. It was deliberately shoved into a dark, cramped corner, positioned directly next to the heavy swinging doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter rushed in or out carrying massive trays of food, the heavy wooden doors would swing violently outward, sending a rush of hot air and the overpowering smell of commercial dishwashers right across the table. It was a calculated physical insult designed to remind me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. I was the discarded afterthought, literally seated with the help. I walked over to the table and took my seat, maintaining perfect posture. I smoothed the skirt of my charcoal designer dress and picked up my water glass. The psychological warfare had officially begun, but Dominique had vastly underestimated my tolerance for discomfort. My dining companions for the evening were a chaotic group of loud, obnoxious fraternity brothers. They were already several drinks deep into the open bar, laughing too loudly and taking up entirely too much space. But my eyes immediately locked onto the man sitting directly across from me. It was Jamal, the licensed public notary who had illegally stamped my forged signature on the bank loan documents. Jamal was sweating heavily through his expensive dress shirt, his eyes darting around the room nervously. When he finally looked across the table and saw me sitting there, he actually flinched. He quickly picked up his beer and took a long gulp, trying to avoid eye contact. He knew what he had done. He knew that participating in federal identity theft was a massive risk, but he clearly believed that because it was a family matter, I would never find out. Or worse, he believed that even if I did find out, I would be too weak to do anything about it. "Hey, Simone," Jamal stammered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "It is really cool of you to come tonight. Shows a lot of class. You know, considering everything." I rested my elbows on the table, interlacing my fingers, and offered him a long, unblinking stare. "I would not miss it for the world, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You know me. I always pay close attention to the details. I like to make sure everything is signed and sealed properly." Jamal swallowed hard, a look of mild panic flashing across his face. He let out an awkward, forced laugh and quickly turned his attention to the fraternity brother sitting next to him, desperately trying to change the subject. I watched his hands shake slightly as he picked up his fork. He had absolutely no idea that I already had a copy of his notary stamp locked in a secure legal file, and that his career was going to be completely destroyed before the weekend was over. As the dinner service began, the swinging kitchen doors lived up to their miserable placement. Waiters rushed past, bumping the back of my chair with their hips. I did not complain. I did not ask to be moved. I sat there with quiet dignity, cutting my steak methodically. Halfway through the main course, the family pity tour commenced. Aunt Denise and Aunt Clara practically materialized beside my chair, their faces twisted into exaggerated expressions of deep sorrow. They had spent the entire evening at the front of the room fawning over the happy couple, but now they had come to the back corner to collect their drama tax. "Oh, Simone." Aunt Denise sighed, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "We just wanted to come over and tell you how incredibly brave you are for being here. I told Clara earlier, I said I do not know how Simone is doing it. If it were me, I would be at home in tears. It takes a strong woman to sit back and watch her sister marry the man she loved." Aunt Clara nodded solemnly, clutching her pearl necklace. "God has a plan for you, dear. He closes one door so he can open a window. You just have to pray on it, and eventually you will find a man who appreciates your unique personality. It might take a while, but do not give up hope." The passive-aggressive nature of their sympathy was suffocating. They did not actually care about my feelings. They were fishing for a reaction. They wanted me to confess my misery so they could rush back to my mother and report that I was falling apart just as they had all predicted. I dabbed the corners of my mouth with my linen napkin and looked up at them with a bright, genuine smile. "Thank you both so much for your concern," I said, my voice dripping with polite sincerity. "But there is absolutely no need to pray for me. I can honestly say I have never felt more secure in my future than I do right at this very moment. Tomorrow is going to be a day of absolute clarity for all of us." Aunt Denise frowned, clearly disappointed by my lack of visible suffering. "Well, just know we are here for you," she mumbled, giving my shoulder one last awkward pat before dragging Clara back toward the head table. I turned my attention to the front of the room. Dominique and Trey were sitting at a massive sweetheart table elevated on a small stage. Dominique was wearing a sparkling white cocktail dress, laughing at something my father had just said. My mother, Patricia, was standing right behind her, holding a glass of champagne, looking out over the crowd with total satisfaction. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime, the perfect, wealthy, happy family. Dominique caught my eye across the crowded ballroom. She raised her champagne flute, giving me a tiny, condescending wave. She was mocking me. She thought seating me by the kitchen doors with the frat brothers was the ultimate power move. She thought she had completely broken my spirit. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and raised it right back to her, acknowledging the toast. I took a slow sip, savoring the cold, crisp water. They thought I was trapped in the corner eating scraps. They had no idea I was holding a loaded gun under the table. The fraudulent loan, the identity theft, the wire transfers, and the fake corporate filings were all locked and loaded. Every single insult, every single condescending smile, and every single attempt to humiliate me only made my grip on the trigger tighter. I ate my steak in total silence, a predator sitting perfectly still in the tall grass, just waiting for the sun to come up on wedding day. The heavy main course was finally cleared from the tables, replaced by delicate porcelain plates of tiramisu and small cups of dark roasted coffee. The ballroom had grown significantly louder as the open bar continued to fuel the chaotic energy of the guests. The frat brothers at my table were now loudly debating college sports, completely ignoring my presence, which suited me perfectly. But the stifling air of the room, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and roasted meats, was beginning to give me a slight headache. I needed a moment of absolute silence before enduring the final hour of this charade. I carefully placed my linen napkin on the table, picked up my small leather clutch, and stood up. I did not make eye contact with anyone as I navigated through the maze of crowded tables, walking toward the heavy double doors that led to the lobby. Once I slipped past the doors, the overwhelming noise of the ballroom instantly muffled into a dull, distant throb. The corridor leading to the restrooms was long and dimly lit, lined with thick velvet curtains and framed photographs of historic golf tournaments. The plush carpet absorbed the sharp clicking of my heels, creating a profound sense of isolation. I walked into the women's restroom, letting out a long, slow exhale as the heavy oak door swung shut behind me. The room was empty, smelling faintly of lavender soap and white lilies. I walked over to the marble vanity and turned on the cold water, letting it run over my wrists. I looked up at my reflection in the wide, brilliantly lit mirror. I looked exactly as I intended to look. Unbothered, polished, and completely untouchable. The charcoal designer dress hugged my frame perfectly, acting as a sleek layer of armor. I took a deep breath, centering my focus. I had successfully survived the dinner. The trap was locked. All I had to do was walk back out there, sit quietly for another 45 minutes, and then go home to prepare for the final execution tomorrow morning. I dried my hands on a thick monogram towel, checked my lipstick one last time, and pulled the heavy oak door open to head back to the ballroom. I stopped dead in my tracks. Trey was standing in the middle of the narrow hallway. He had clearly followed me out of the ballroom. He was leaning casually against the wall with one ankle crossed over the other, holding a heavy crystal glass filled with amber whiskey. The dim lighting of the corridor cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the arrogant smirk playing on his lips. When he heard the restroom door click shut, he slowly turned his head, looking me up and down with an expression of blatant hunger that made my skin crawl. "Well, look who is hiding from the party." Trey drawled, his voice thick with liquor and unearned confidence. "I am not hiding, Trey," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. "I am simply using the restroom. Now please step aside." I am returning to my table. I took a step forward, expecting him to move out of the way. He did not. Instead, he pushed himself off the wall and took a deliberate step toward me, placing his large frame directly in the center of the narrow corridor. He physically blocked my path, trapping me between his broad shoulders and the heavy velvet curtains lining the wall. "What is the rush, Simone?" he asked, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal glass. "You have been sitting in that corner all night looking like a queen who lost her throne. I just wanted to come check on you. Make sure you were holding up okay. Considering the circumstances." The sheer audacity of his condescension was staggering. He was the man who had cheated on me, stolen my identity, and forged my signature to take out a massive federal loan. Yet here he was trying to play the benevolent, concerned friend. "I am perfectly fine, Trey," I replied, refusing to break eye contact. "In fact, I have never been better. Now move." Trey let out a low, patronizing chuckle. He took another step forward, invading my personal space. The heavy scent of his expensive cologne, mixed with the sharp odor of alcohol, washed over me. He looked down at me, his eyes softening into a practiced expression of deep manufactured regret. This was the face he used when he wanted something. This was the face he used to manipulate the world around him. "Come on, Simone," he murmured, his voice dropping to a smooth, intimate whisper. "Do not be so cold. You and I both know you do not want to be out there pretending to be happy for us. And honestly, I do not want to be out there right now either." I kept my face completely blank, an emotionless mask. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill the void with his own lies. As a fraud investigator, I knew that the best way to catch a con artist was to simply let them speak. When they feel like they are losing control of the narrative, they will say anything to regain the upper hand. "You think I wanted things to happen this way?" Trey asked, shaking his head tragically as if he were the victim of some grand cosmic conspiracy. "You think I planned this? Simone, you have to know that I was forced into this corner." "Forced?" I repeated, my tone dripping with dry skepticism. "Yes, forced," he insisted, stepping even closer. His free hand reached out, hovering just inches from my arm, before he thought better of it and dropped it back to his side. "It was your mother, Simone." Patricia was constantly in my ear. "Every single time you were busy working late, she was there planting seeds, telling me I needed a woman who was more available, telling me you were too obsessed with your career to ever build a real family with me." He took another sip of his whiskey, his eyes searching mine for any sign of sympathy. He was actively trying to rewrite history, trying to shift the entire blame onto my toxic mother. And then there was Dominique. He continued, his voice laced with sudden contempt. "You know how she is. She threw herself at me, Simone. She was constantly showing up at my apartment crying about how much she admired me, needing advice, needing attention. I was in a vulnerable place and she just trapped me." Before I knew what was happening, Patricia was practically planning the wedding and Dominique was picking out rings. I stared at him, marveling at the pure, unadulterated narcissism required to spin such a ridiculous lie. He was an adult man, capable of making his own choices. He had actively chosen to sleep with my sister. He had actively chosen to steal my social security number to fund his fake business. But in his twisted mind, nothing was ever his fault. He was just a passenger in his own life, dragged along by the women around him. "It is a nightmare," Simone Trey whispered, leaning in so close I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "Dominique is exhausting. She is an absolute child. She needs constant validation, constant presence, constant attention. Every single day is a new drama with her. I am suffocating in that relationship. She does not understand me the way you did. She does not challenge me. He was setting the stage. He was trying to tear down the woman he was marrying tomorrow morning in a desperate bid to win back my approval. He thought that because my family had always pitted Dominique and me against each other, I would take pleasure in hearing him insult her. He thought it would make me feel chosen. He thought it would make me feel like I had ultimately won the competition. But I was not playing his game. I was playing an entirely different sport. I looked at him processing every single word he had just spoken. He was admitting that he despised the woman he was about to marry. He was admitting that the entire wedding was a sham orchestrated for convenience and status. And he was doing it all while standing in a secluded hallway, completely unaware of the legal trap I had already locked around his ankles. A dangerous idea began to form in my mind. If Trey was willing to throw Dominique under the bus this easily to my face, what else would he be willing to admit if I just gave him a little more rope? I needed him to keep talking. I needed him to dig his own grave so deep that he could never possibly climb out. I softened my posture just a fraction of an inch, letting my shoulders drop as if his words were actually getting through to me. I looked down at the plush carpet and then slowly looked back up into his eyes, playing the part of the conflicted, heartbroken ex-fiancé. "If she is so exhausting, Trey," I asked, keeping my voice soft and deliberately vulnerable. "If you really feel trapped by my mother and smothered by Dominique, then why are you going through with it? Why are you standing at the altar tomorrow morning?" Trey smiled. It was a greasy, triumphant smile. He thought he had me exactly where he wanted me. He thought the cold, impenetrable armor I had worn all night was finally cracking. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest, completely relaxed, and ready to deliver his master plan. He had absolutely no idea that as I stood there listening to him, my right hand was slowly, seamlessly sliding into the open clasp of my leather clutch. My thumb brushed the smooth glass screen of my phone, feeling for the familiar layout of the voice memo app. Without looking down, I pressed the large red button in the center of the screen. A tiny vibration confirmed that the recording had started. I left the clutch slightly open, keeping the microphone completely unobstructed. I looked up at Trey, letting out a soft, convincing sigh. "You still have not answered my question, Trey. If it is such a nightmare, why are you marrying her?" Trey chuckled, a dark, greedy sound that echoed in the empty hallway. He uncrossed his arms and took another step toward me, closing the distance until I could feel the warmth of his breath. "Because of the family trust fund, Simone. You know exactly how your father structured it. The second Dominique gets married, she gains full access to her portion of the estate. We are talking about millions of dollars. Your father is practically handing me the keys to the kingdom just for showing up and saying I do." He took a long sip of his whiskey, swirling the amber liquid around the crystal glass. "I give it a year. Maybe 18 months tops. I will deal with her constant whining and her desperate need for attention for a little while. I will let her play house. But once those joint accounts are set up and the money is transferred, I am going to drain them dry. I will take what I deserve for putting up with this circus. And then I am out." I kept my facial expression completely frozen, but internally my mind was racing. He was handing me a loaded weapon. He was not just a narcissist, he was a predatory sociopath. He had stolen my identity to fund a fake business, and now he was openly confessing to a premeditated plot to defraud my sister and my father out of millions. "But what about Dominique?" I asked, keeping my tone soft and curious. "What happens to her when you leave?" Trey rolled his eyes, groaning as if the very thought of her was a massive inconvenience. "She will run back to your mother crying about how unfair the world is, just like she always does. Patricia will coddle her and blame me, and they will spend the rest of their lives complaining in that big house. It is not my problem, Simone. She threw herself at me because she wanted to take something that belonged to you. She wanted to win. Let her enjoy her little victory for a year before reality hits." He reached out slowly this time, not stopping when I did not pull away. He placed his large, heavy hand on my bare shoulder, rubbing his thumb against my skin. His touch was revolting, but I forced myself to stand perfectly still. "But that does not mean you and I have to lose what we had," he whispered, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. "We always had a great connection, Simone. You are smart and driven, and you actually understand how the real world works. Dominique is just a trust fund piggy bank, but you are a real partner." I looked at his hand resting on my shoulder and then back up to his eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting, Trey?" He smiled, leaning in so close his lips brushed against my ear. "We can have the best of both worlds, Simone. I will marry her tomorrow and secure the bag. You keep building your career and living in the city. Nobody has to know a thing. We can still hook up on the side. We can travel, take trips on her dime, and enjoy ourselves. It is the perfect arrangement, the absolute sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man. He had cheated on me, stolen my social security number, forged my signature on a federal loan, humiliated me in front of my entire family. And now he was propositioning me to be his secret mistress while he robbed my sister blind. It was a level of depravity that almost commanded respect for its pure villainy. I did not slap him. I did not scream. I did not shove him away and call him a monster. I needed the audio recording to be perfectly clear without any sudden noises or scuffles. I slowly reached up and placed my hand over his, gently lifting his fingers off my shoulder. I stepped back, creating a physical boundary between us. I looked at him with a small, enigmatic smile. "You always did think big, Trey," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "I have to admit, I did not see that coming." He beamed, puffing his chest out. He thought I was actually considering it. He thought his charm and manipulation had worked flawlessly. "Think about it, Simone," he said, taking a step back to give me space. "Just play your part tomorrow. Smile for the pictures. Let them think they won. And then next week when they go on their honeymoon, I will come see you and we can talk about the future." I reached my hand deep into my leather clutch and pressed the stop button on the voice memo app. The recording was saved securely to the cloud, backed up instantly to my secure servers. I had him. I had everything I needed to destroy his entire existence. "I will certainly play my part tomorrow, Trey," I said, my smile widening into something cold and genuine. "You are going to get exactly the future you deserve, every single piece of it." Trey raised his whiskey glass in a mocking little toast. "I knew you were the smart one, Simone. See you out there." He turned around and walked back down the hallway, disappearing through the heavy mahogany doors that led to the ballroom. I stood alone in the dim corridor for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. I pulled my phone out of my clutch and checked the audio file. It was perfectly crisp. Every single word of his greedy sociopathic confession was captured in high definition. I locked my phone and dropped it back into my bag. I had arrived at this country club as the family scapegoat, the discarded older sister forced to sit by the kitchen doors and endure the pity of my aunts. But I was leaving as the architect of their total destruction. I smoothed the fabric of my charcoal dress, rolled my shoulders back, and walked toward the ballroom. When I pushed through the doors, the noise of the party washed over me again. The frat brothers at my table had escalated their loud conversation to a shouting match about college football. Jamal, the sweating notary public, was completely engrossed in his phone, looking desperate to avoid any further interaction with me. I sat down gracefully, taking a sip of my water. I watched my mother, Patricia, tapping a spoon against her champagne glass to command the attention of the room once again. She just could not resist the spotlight. She stood up, weaving slightly from the alcohol, and began another long-winded speech about how perfect Dominique and Trey were for each other. She talked about loyalty and family values and the importance of finding a man who respects you. Every word out of her mouth was a hypocritical contradiction to the reality I had just recorded in the hallway. I listened to her drone on and on, feeling a profound sense of detachment. These people were not my family. They were strangers playing characters in a poorly written script. Dominique looked over at me during the speech, her eyes searching for a reaction. She wanted to see me wincing in pain as our mother praised her relationship. I simply offered her a polite blank stare. There was no need to fight back tonight. The war was already won. They were just going through the motions of a victory they had already lost. When the dinner finally concluded, the guests began to filter out of the ballroom heading toward their cars or the hotel suites upstairs. I did not linger to say goodbye. I walked out of the country club breathing in the cool night air. The valet brought my car around and I tipped him generously before sliding into the driver's seat. As I drove back to my apartment, the city streets were quiet and empty. The heavy burden of the past 35 years, the constant need for my parents' approval, the endless competition with my sister, the heartbreak of betrayal, it all felt incredibly light now. It had all been replaced by a singular, focused objective. I was going to execute the most precise, devastating legal retaliation my family had ever seen. The rehearsal dinner was finished. The audio confession was secure. The paperwork was printed. I parked my car and took the elevator up to my penthouse. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. Hanging in the center, protected by a heavy garment bag, was the dress I was going to wear tomorrow. I unzipped the bag just enough to see the pristine white fabric. I smiled. It was going to be a beautiful wedding. I woke up the morning of the wedding feeling entirely well-rested. I had slept a solid 8 hours uninterrupted by any lingering doubts or guilt. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting a warm golden glow across the hardwood floors. I walked into my kitchen, tied a silk robe around my waist, and began my morning routine. I ground fresh coffee beans, the rich, earthy aroma filling the quiet space. As the coffee brewed, I stood by the window looking out over the waking city. Down below, traffic was already beginning to weave through the streets. People were starting their days completely unaware that I was about to execute the most meticulously planned financial and social ruin my family had ever witnessed. I poured my coffee into a ceramic mug and took a slow, warm sip. The house was perfectly silent. It was a beautiful moment of peace, the calm before the absolute hurricane. Then the aggressive pounding started. It was not a polite knock. It was a frantic, heavy banging that echoed sharply through my quiet apartment. The concierge downstairs knew better than to let anyone up without calling first, but my mother, Patricia, had a terrifying talent for slipping past security desks by throwing high-pitched tantrums about being the mother of the bride. I set my coffee mug down on the marble counter. I walked slowly toward the front entrance, feeling the cool hardwood beneath my bare feet. I looked through the digital peephole. Patricia was standing in the hallway, pacing back and forth, furiously checking her smartwatch. She was already dressed in her tailored mother-of-the-bride gown, a shimmering silver monstrosity that looked more suited for a gala than a morning wedding. Her hair was perfectly sprayed into place, but her face was tight with stress. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. Before I could even say good morning, Patricia shoved her way past me, practically marching into my foyer. She did not ask if I was awake. She did not apologize for the intrusion. She treated my home exactly the way she treated my boundaries, like they did not exist. "Simone, thank God you are up," Patricia huffed, dropping her designer handbag onto my entryway table with a loud thud. "The entire morning has been an absolute disaster. The florist brought the wrong shade of white roses for the reception centerpieces, and the caterer is threatening to charge overtime because the setup took too long. I have been putting out fires since 5 in the morning." I closed the front door quietly, leaning against it and crossing my arms over my chest. "What are you doing here, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm and low. "The ceremony does not start for another 4 hours. You should be at the hotel with Dominique." "That is exactly why I am here," Patricia snapped, turning around to face me. Her eyes darted around my apartment, taking in the expensive artwork and the sleek modern furniture with her usual quiet resentment. "Dominique is having a complete meltdown in the bridal suite. She has her something old, her something new, and her something blue. But she completely forgot about her something borrowed. She is crying her makeup off, and the photographer is going to be there in 20 minutes to start taking the getting ready portraits." I stared at her, waiting. I knew exactly what she was about to ask for, and the sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. So Patricia continued walking toward me with an expectant, outstretched hand. I need you to go into your safe right now and get your grandmother vintage pearls. The double strand ones with the diamond clasp. Dominique wants to wear them. They will look absolutely perfect with the neckline of her custom gown. I let out a slow, steady breath. The vintage pearls she was talking about were not just any piece of jewelry. They were a generational family heirloom that my grandmother had worn on her own wedding day. But more importantly, my grandmother had explicitly bypassed Patricia and left them directly to me. She gave them to me on the day I graduated with my master's degree, telling me they belonged to a woman who understood the value of hard work and self-respect. They were my most prized possession. And now my mother was barging into my home, demanding I hand them over so the sister who stole my fiancé and committed federal identity theft could use them as a photo prop. No, I said simply. My voice did not waver. Patricia blinked, staring at me as if I had just started speaking a foreign language. Her outstretched hand dropped slowly to her side. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone sharpening into a dangerous edge. I said, "No, Mom. I am not giving Dominique my pearls. They are not a prop and they are certainly not leaving my apartment." Patricia's face flushed with immediate anger. The familiar toxic rage, the same rage she used to control me when I was a teenager, began to bubble to the surface. "Simone, do not do this," she warned, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Do not be difficult today of all days. Your sister is in hysterics. This is her wedding day. She needs those pearls to complete her outfit. You never even wear them. They just sit in a dark safe doing absolutely nothing. I wear them when it matters." I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "And today, they are staying exactly where they are. Dominique will just have to borrow something else. Maybe she can borrow one of your silver bracelets." "You are doing this on purpose!" Patricia spat, her voice rising to a shrill volume that echoed off the high ceilings of my penthouse. "You are just doing this to punish her because she is marrying Trey. You are letting your petty, bitter jealousy ruin your sister's special day. You cannot stand the fact that she is getting the fairy tale ending that you could not keep. I knew you would try to sabotage this. I told your father you were acting too quiet at the rehearsal dinner." I stood perfectly still, letting her toxic words wash over me like water off a stone. She thought I was bitter over a man. She thought I was holding back a necklace out of petty romantic jealousy. She had absolutely no idea that I held the legal rights to her entire financial future. The pearls were the absolute least of her problems. My lack of reaction only infuriated Patricia more. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use her physical presence to intimidate me. "I am not leaving here without that necklace, Simone. You are being incredibly selfish. After everything Dominique has been through with the stress of this wedding, the least you can do is lend her a piece of family history. She is the bride. Family shares with family. It is what your grandmother would have wanted. Do not bring grandmother into this," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet octave. "Grandmother gave those pearls to me because I earned them. She did not hand them out as a consolation prize for stealing someone else's life." Patricia gasped dramatically, placing a hand over her chest, as if I had just struck her physically. "You are a cold, unnatural woman, Simone. No wonder Trey left you. He needed warmth, and you are just ice. You are going to die alone, holding onto your jewelry and your bank accounts, and no one in this family will be there to care." It was the ultimate toxic mother line. The emotional kill shot she had kept in her arsenal for decades. But the gun was completely empty. I looked at the frantic, desperate woman standing in my foyer and felt absolutely nothing. The emotional umbilical cord had been permanently severed. "The answer is no, Mom," I said, stepping away from the door and gesturing back toward the hallway. "You need to leave right now. I have to get dressed. I have a wedding to attend." Patricia did not move toward the door. Instead, her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She had realized that her usual tactics of guilt and manipulation were completely ineffective against me now. And when a narcissist realizes they have entirely lost control of their target, they do not retreat gracefully. They attack with the explicit intention to destroy. You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Simone. Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with a dark, venomous rage. You think you are so incredibly smart sitting up here in your expensive penthouse looking down on your own family? But you are nothing but an empty shell. You have all this money, and yet you have absolutely nothing that actually matters. She took a step closer, pointing her manicured finger mere inches from my face. This is exactly why Trey left you, she spat, the words flying from her mouth like jagged stones. You are cold, Simone. You have no heart and you have no warmth. You treat every single person around you like a calculated business transaction. You will die alone, and I promise you right now that I will not be there to hold your hand when you do. You will have no one. The words were specifically designed to obliterate my spirit. They were crafted from years of studying my deepest insecurities. 10 years ago, a speech like that from my mother would have sent me crumbling to the floor. I would have begged for her forgiveness and eagerly handed over the vintage pearls just to make the screaming stop and restore the fragile peace. I would have sacrificed my own dignity just to keep her from withdrawing her conditional love. But standing there today in the bright morning light of my home, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound sense of liberation. The terrifying monster under the bed had finally been exposed as nothing more than a pathetic, angry woman throwing a tantrum in my hallway. She had fired the absolute worst ammunition she had in her arsenal, and the bullets had simply bounced off my armor. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice to defend my character or hurl insults back at her. I maintained a steady, unblinking eye contact that made her physically uncomfortable. I simply reached out and grasped the heavy brass handle of my front door, pulling it wide open. The quiet, carpeted hallway of my luxury building stretched out behind her, offering a stark contrast to the chaotic energy she had brought into my foyer. I raised my hand and pointed a single steady finger toward the exit. I will see you at the altar, Mother, I said in a deadly calm voice. Patricia stood frozen for a fraction of a second. She was completely disarmed by the absolute chilling finality in my tone. She was waiting for a fight, but I was giving her an eviction. She snatched her designer handbag off the console table, her knuckles turning white from how tightly she gripped the leather straps. She marched out of the apartment, her heels stomping aggressively against the hardwood floor. She did not say another word. She did not look back. I pushed the door shut and turned the heavy brass deadbolt. The loud, solid click echoed through the foyer, sealing the quiet sanctuary of my home once again. I leaned my back against the solid wood, closing my eyes and taking a deep, cleansing breath. The air in the apartment felt instantly lighter. It was as if a thick, suffocating fog had finally lifted from the rooms. I had just drawn the ultimate boundary. I had looked the source of my childhood trauma directly in the eyes and refused to bend. The final thread of toxic obligation that tied me to that family had just been permanently severed. I walked away from the front door and moved down the hallway toward my home office. I walked over to the heavy steel safe bolted to the floor in the corner of the room. I typed in the digital passcode and pulled the heavy door open. Resting on the top shelf inside a faded velvet box were my grandmother's vintage pearls. I gently lifted the lid, looking at the perfectly matched luminous white spheres and the intricate diamond clasp. My grandmother had worn these pearls on a day of genuine love and mutual respect. She had built a beautiful life from the ground up, and she had gifted them to me because she recognized that same quiet strength in my character. Giving them to Dominique to wear as a shallow photo prop while she married a man she actively conspired to commit felony fraud with would have been a massive insult to my grandmother's memory. I closed the velvet box and left it safely inside the steel vault, locking the heavy door behind me. The pearls were exactly where they belonged. I glanced at the glowing digital clock on my desk. It was 9 in the morning. The ceremony was scheduled to begin promptly at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at the massive downtown cathedral. I had exactly 4 hours to transform myself from the discarded older sister into the architect of their absolute ruin. I walked out of the office and headed straight for my master's suite. The time for gathering evidence was over. The time for enduring passive-aggressive dinners and fake polite conversations had officially expired. My mother visit had been the perfect catalyst, confirming that showing them even a single ounce of mercy would be a terrible mistake. They were completely unrepentant in their cruelty and their greed. I stepped into my expansive walk-in closet. Pushed all the way to the back, hanging behind my tailored business suits and evening gowns, was the hideous bridesmaid dress Dominique had assigned to me. It was a pale, washed-out peach color made of cheap synthetic chiffon that was specifically designed to make me look completely washed out and miserable in the wedding photos. I grabbed the plastic hanger, yanked the peach dress off the rack, and tossed it carelessly into the trash can sitting in the corner of the room. I was not a bridesmaid. I was the executioner. I turned my attention to the center of the closet. Hanging securely inside a thick, opaque garment bag was the actual outfit I had prepared for this day. I reached up and slowly pulled the heavy zipper down, revealing the pristine fabric inside. I ran my fingers over the smooth material, a cool, confident smile spreading across my face. The final phase of the plan was officially in motion. The zipper of the heavy garment bag slid down smoothly, revealing the masterpiece I had commissioned weeks ago. It was a stark, blindingly white designer evening gown. The fabric was a heavy, luxurious silk crepe that caught the morning light and seemed to glow from within. It featured a deep, elegant neckline, structured shoulders that commanded authority, and a sweeping asymmetrical hemline that flowed like liquid silver. It was not a traditional wedding dress, but it was undeniably bridal in its extravagance. More importantly, it was a deliberate, calculated violation of the most sacred rule of wedding etiquette. You do not wear white to another woman's wedding unless your explicit intention is to completely destroy her moment. And that was exactly what I was going to do. I let the silk fabric slip over my shoulders, feeling the cool, heavy weight of the gown settle perfectly against my curves. I did not need a team of bridesmaids to help me lace it up, or a toxic mother to adjust the train. I zipped the hidden closure myself, standing tall and independent. The dress fit me like a second skin. It was not just an outfit, it was a physical manifestation of my power. It was my armor. I walked over to my modern glass vanity and sat down on the velvet stool to begin my preparation. I approached my hair and makeup with the same methodical precision I used when dismantling corporate fraud networks. Every brushstroke was deliberate. Every application was flawless. I swept my dark hair back into a sleek, sophisticated chignon, securing it tightly at the nape of my neck to ensure not a single strand was out of place. I applied a flawless matte foundation sharp-winged eyeliner that made my eyes look piercing and unreadable, and finished with a bold, deep crimson lipstick. It was not the soft, romantic makeup of a supportive sister. It was the fierce, unforgiving war paint of a woman stepping onto a battlefield. When I stood up and looked at my full reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. The scapegoat was entirely gone. The jilted older sister who used to shrink herself to make Dominique feel bigger had been completely eradicated. The woman in the mirror was cold, wealthy, untouchable, and fully prepared to execute a flawless retaliation. I turned away from the mirror and walked over to my desk to assemble the ammunition. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a sleek, flat velvet presentation box. It was a custom piece originally designed to hold a heavy diamond necklace, but I had repurposed it for something far more valuable. I opened the velvet lid. Inside the plush black interior, I placed the small silver flash drive. That tiny piece of metal contained the high-definition audio recording of Trey admitting to his sociopathic plot to drain Dominique Trust Fund. It also contained every single forensic wire transfer receipt proving they had used my stolen identity to fund the very wedding I was about to attend. Next to the flash drive, I placed the finalized legal documents Kenneth had delivered the night before. I had folded the official notice of foreclosure and the civil lawsuit for $150,000 into a neat, compact square. They fit perfectly inside the velvet box resting right beside the silver drive. I snapped the lid shut. The box was heavy, substantial, and completely lethal. I slipped the velvet box into my structured white leather clutch, along with my phone and a single tube of my crimson lipstick. I snapped the clutch shut, securing the lock. The trap was now fully armed and entirely mobile. I walked into my entryway and stepped into a pair of towering white designer stilettos. The sharp click of the heels against the hardwood floor echoed through the silent apartment, sounding exactly like the ticking of a countdown clock. I checked my diamond wristwatch. It was exactly 12:30 in the afternoon. The wedding ceremony was scheduled to begin at 1 o'clock sharp. I knew the timeline perfectly. Dominique would be hidden away in the bridal suite right now, obsessing over her makeup and demanding constant reassurance from Patricia. The guests would be filing into the cathedral, finding their seats, and whispering about the beautiful floral arrangements paid for with my stolen money. At 1 o'clock, the string quartet would begin to play. The obnoxious fraternity brothers would walk down the aisle, followed by the bridesmaids in their hideous peach dresses. Finally, Dominique would make her grand entrance, soaking up the attention she had craved her entire life. I had absolutely no intention of being there for any of that. I was not going to sit politely in a wooden pew near the back of the church, watching the man who betrayed me make false vows to the sister who robbed me. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of my quiet submission. I was going to let them reach the absolute pinnacle of their joy. I was going to let them stand at the altar, looking out at their perfect fake world, believing they had completely gotten away with it. I grabbed my keys and walked out of my penthouse, locking the heavy door behind me. I rode the elevator down to the private garage, my heartbeat slow and incredibly steady. I slid into the driver's seat of my luxury SUV, placing my white leather clutch carefully on the passenger seat. I started the engine, the deep hum vibrating through the steering wheel. I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the busy downtown streets, heading toward the massive stone cathedral. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, completely oblivious to the absolute devastation that was about to unfold beneath it. I drove the speed limit, navigating the city traffic with total calm. I was not just going to a wedding today. I was driving to an execution, and I was the one holding the axe. I pulled my vehicle into the circular driveway of the historic downtown cathedral. The massive Gothic stone structure loomed against the bright blue sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawns. I parked in a space reserved for the bridal party directly behind a stretch limousine. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet cabin for a moment. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My crimson lipstick was flawless. My white designer gown was pristine. I picked up my white leather clutch, feeling the solid weight of the velvet box inside. I opened the door and stepped out onto the pavement. The heavy wooden doors of the cathedral were shut tight. Two ushers stood outside wearing uncomfortable tuxedos. When they saw me approaching in a stark white sweeping evening gown, their eyes widened in absolute shock. They recognized me as the sister of the bride, but their brains could not process the extreme violation of wedding etiquette unfolding right in front of them. One of them stepped forward, opening his mouth to speak, but I gave him a single sharp look that instantly silenced him. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and firmly grasped the heavy iron handle of the right door. I waited for the perfect moment. I could hear the faint, beautiful strains of a string quartet playing the traditional bridal march from inside. Dominique had already made her entrance. The guests were standing. The ceremony was officially underway. I pushed the heavy oak door open with a solid shove. The hinges let out a low, resonant creak that cut through the delicate music. The bright afternoon sunlight poured into the dimly lit sanctuary, framing my silhouette in the doorway. I stepped over the threshold and into the center aisle. The interior of the cathedral was breathtaking. Vaulted ceilings stretched high above, lined with intricate stained glass windows that bathed the pews in fractured, colorful light. 200 guests were packed into the wooden benches, turned toward the altar where Dominique and Trey were standing. But the sound of the heavy door opening caused a ripple of movement. One by one, heads began to turn toward the back of the church. The moment the first guest fully processed what I was wearing, a sharp, audible gasp echoed through the cavernous space. It was a chain reaction. Within seconds, every single person in the cathedral was staring at me. The whispering started as a low hum and quickly escalated into a frantic buzzing noise that bounced off the stone walls. I kept my head high, my shoulders back, and my posture perfectly straight. I began my slow, measured walk down the long, carpeted aisle. The click of my white stilettos against the marble floor kept a steady, rhythmic beat. I looked straight ahead, refusing to break eye contact with the altar. I could feel the collective shock and outrage radiating from the pews. I saw Aunt Denise clutch her chest, as if she were having a medical emergency. I saw Aunt Clara cover her mouth with a lace handkerchief. I passed the row where Trey frat brothers were standing. Jamal, the sweating notary public, looked like he was about to vomit directly onto his shoes. He took a step back, bumping into the wooden pew as I glided past him. As I approached the front rows, the reactions of my immediate family came into sharp focus. My father, James, was standing near the front pew, his face pale, his brow furrowed in utter confusion. He looked helplessly at my mother, completely incapable of handling the disruption. My mother, Patricia, was a completely different story. Her face had drained of all color before flushing into a deep, dangerous shade of purple. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated fury. She took a step into the aisle as if she were going to physically tackle me, but I did not even flinch. I simply kept walking, forcing her to step back or be trampled. She was shaking with rage, but she could not scream or throw a tantrum without ruining the sacred decorum of the church. I had trapped her in her own pretentious rules. At the altar, the perfect couple was falling apart. Dominique was gripping Trey's arms so tightly her knuckles were completely white. Her custom bridal gown suddenly looked foolish and excessive, standing next to the sleek, modern power of my white silk dress. Her jaw was trembling and her eyes were darting around the room, frantically looking for someone to fix the situation. She looked like she might genuinely pass out right there on the marble steps. Trey looked like he had just seen a ghost. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes locked onto mine. The arrogant smirk from the hallway last night was entirely gone. He saw the cold, absolute certainty in my expression, and he knew instantly that his entire world was about to collapse. I reached the very front row and stopped. I did not take a seat. I stood in the center of the aisle, right at the base of the altar steps, an undeniable physical disruption to their perfectly orchestrated fantasy. The string quartet, unsure of what to do, slowly allowed the music to fade out, leaving the cathedral in a suffocating, heavy silence. The elderly priest standing behind the wooden podium looked incredibly nervous. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses and looking out at the congregation with a bewildered expression. He was clearly unaccustomed to such blatant family warfare interrupting his holy ceremonies. He looked at Dominique, who was silently mouthing the words, "Make her leave." He looked at Trey, who was completely frozen in terror. Finally, he looked at me, standing tall and radiant in my white armor. "Please," the priest stammered, his voice echoing slightly over the microphone. "Let us continue with the Holy Sacrament." He looked down at his leather-bound book, his hands shaking slightly as he found his place. The tension in the room was so thick, it felt like it was pulling the oxygen from my lungs, but I breathed easily. I was entirely in my element. "Dearly beloved," the priest continued, his voice rushing through the familiar words in a desperate attempt to restore order. "We are gathered here today in the sight of God to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." I kept my eyes locked on Trey. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing a line down the side of his face. He knew what was coming. He just did not know how bad it was going to be. The priest reached the critical juncture of the ceremony. The traditional line that everyone knows from movies, but no one ever actually expects to hear, utilized in real life. He took a deep breath and read the words. If anyone can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The priest paused, expecting the usual polite silence. He did not get it. I object, I said. I did not yell. I did not scream. I projected my voice from my diaphragm, allowing the acoustics of the cathedral to carry the two simple words to the very back row. The sound cut through the silence like a sharp, heavy blade. Total, absolute pandemonium erupted inside the church. Dominique let out a high-pitched, hysterical scream. "Security!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Somebody get her out of here. She is crazy. Mom, get her out." Patricia lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Simone, have you lost your mind?" she hissed venomously, her fingers digging into my skin. "You are ruining everything. Leave right now before I call the police." I turned my head and looked down at my mother, hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she felt the icy threat in my gaze and slowly released me, stepping back in shock. "I am not going anywhere, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly level. "And you really do not want to involve the police right now. Trust me." I turned my attention back to the altar. I placed one white stiletto onto the bottom marble step, then the next. I walked gracefully up the stairs, ascending to their level. The guests in the front rows were practically standing up, craning their necks to watch the disaster unfold. Trey frat brothers were completely silent. Jamal had his head in his hands. I stopped right in front of the bride and groom. Dominique was crying, her expensive mascara beginning to run down her cheeks, ruining her flawless makeup. She looked pathetic. "What do you want?" Simone, Dominique sobbed, stepping behind Trey and using him as a human shield. "Why are you doing this to me?" I did not answer her. I unclasped the lock on my white leather clutch. The sharp metallic click was the only sound at the altar. I reached inside and pulled out the sleek black velvet presentation box. I held it in the palm of my hand, feeling the heavy weight of their destruction. I turned to the bewildered priest, who had taken a step back, gripping his holy book like a shield. I held the velvet box out toward him. "Father," I said, my voice calm and respectful, "I apologize for interrupting your ceremony, but this marriage cannot proceed. These two people are not who they pretend to be." The priest stared at the velvet box, completely terrified to take it. "What is this, my child?" he asked, his voice trembling. I turned slightly, holding the box out so that Trey was forced to look directly at it. "It is the truth," I said. Trey reached out with a shaking hand. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for mercy. He was silently begging me not to do this, to let him get away with it. But I had no mercy left to give. He took the velvet box from my hand, his fingers brushing against the soft material. "Open it, Trey," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that only he and Dominique could hear. "Open it, and show your bride exactly how much you love her." Trey's hands were trembling so violently he could barely grip the lid. He slowly pried the velvet box open. His eyes dropped to the contents inside, the silver flash drive sitting neatly beside the folded legal documents. He recognized the heavy stock paper. He recognized the gold seal of my private holding company. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse in a tuxedo. He stopped breathing. He knew exactly what was inside the box, and he knew that his life as a free, wealthy man was officially over. I did not wait for Trey to recover from his shock. I stepped around him, approaching the wooden podium where the priest had been standing. I reached out and carefully unclipped the black microphone from its stand. The slight feedback hummed through the massive speakers positioned around the sanctuary, ensuring that every single word I was about to say would be broadcast with crystal clarity. Dominique was still sobbing, clutching the side of her white dress. "Simone, please," she wailed. "What are you doing? Just leave us alone." I looked down at the velvet box in Trey's hands. I reached over and gently took the silver flash drive out of its plush resting place. I held it up so the entire congregation could see it glinting in the stained glass light. Family and friends. I began, my voice echoing smoothly through the cathedral. We were just asked if anyone knew of a lawful reason why this marriage should not proceed, and as it turns out, I know 150,000 reasons. A murmur rippled through the pews. Patricia let out a strangled gasp from the front row, gripping my father's arm. I turned toward the sound technician sitting in a small booth near the side altar. I had scoped out the cathedral setup days ago, and I knew the sound system was fully Bluetooth integrated. I held up the flash drive, pointing directly at the technician. "Plug this into the main terminal right now," I commanded. My tone left absolutely no room for debate. He hesitated for a second, looking at the priest, then looking at my father, before finally taking the drive from my outstretched hand and sliding it into his laptop. "Play the audio file labeled The Confession," I instructed, turning back to the microphone. The cathedral fell completely silent. The heavy anticipation was suffocating. Then the crisp, high-definition audio of the hallway conversation filled the massive space. "Because of the family trust fund, Simone." Trey's voice boomed through the speakers, sounding even more arrogant and predatory than it had the night before. "You know exactly how your father structured it. The second Dominique gets married, she gains full access to her portion of the estate. We are talking about millions of dollars. Your father is practically handing me the keys to the kingdom just for showing up and saying I do." A collective gasp of sheer horror erupted from the congregation. Aunt Denise actually shrieked. Dominique head snapped up, her tear-streaked face twisting into an expression of absolute devastation. She looked at Trey, her jaw dropping completely open. The audio continued, relentless and damning. "I give it a year, maybe 18 months tops." Trey's voice echoed off the stone walls, dripping with contempt. "I will deal with her constant whining and her desperate need for attention for a little while. I will let her play house. But once those joint accounts are set up and the money is transferred, I am going to drain them dry. I will take what I deserve for putting up with this circus, and then I am out." "No!" Dominique screamed, covering her ears with her hands. "No, no, no. That is a lie. That is a fake recording. You made that up, Simone. You edited it." I did not have to defend the recording. The audio file kept playing, delivering the final fatal blow. "We can have the best of both worlds, Simone." Trey's recorded voice murmured intimately. "I will marry her tomorrow and secure the bag. You keep building your career and living in the city. Nobody has to know a thing. We can still hook up on the side. We can travel, take trips on her dime, and enjoy ourselves. It is the perfect arrangement. Dominique is just a trust fund piggy bank, but you are a real partner." The sound technician hurriedly clicked the mouse, stopping the audio. The silence that followed was heavier and more devastating than the noise. Trey stood completely frozen at the altar. His face was a sickly shade of gray. He could not look at Dominique. He could not look at my parents. He just stared at the marble floor, his entire life vaporizing right in front of his eyes. Dominique let out a guttural, agonizing sob. She lunged at him, hitting his chest with her fists. "You piece of trash!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You used me! You were going to steal my money!" Trey weakly tried to catch her wrists, his voice shaking. "Dom, please, baby. It is not what it sounds like. I was drunk. I was just trying to get rid of her." I stepped forward, inserting myself smoothly between them. I reached into the velvet box Trey had dropped onto the altar and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents printed on premium stock paper. "Oh, the audio recording is just the appetizer, Trey," I said, speaking directly into the microphone. "Let us talk about the main course." I turned to Dominique, who was practically hyperventilating. I held out the first document, a beautifully formatted formal notice of foreclosure. "You wanted the brownstone as a wedding gift?" "Dom?" I asked, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "You wanted to move in and start remodeling the kitchen next week, right?" "Well, I brought the deed just like you asked." She snatched the paper from my hand, her eyes darting over the legal jargon. She did not understand what she was looking at. "What is this?" she cried. This is a foreclosure notice from Meridian Holdings. What does this have to do with me? Meridian Holdings is my private wealth management company, Dom. I explained patiently, treating her like a slow child. And that foreclosure notice is for the $150,000 commercial loan that your loving groom took out 6 months ago to fund his fake tech startup. I paused, letting the numbers sink into the minds of the 200 guests watching the spectacle. But Trey credit is garbage, I continued, my voice ringing clear. He could not get a loan for a used bicycle, so he needed a co-signer. He needed collateral. And that is where the two of you got really creative. I pulled out the next document, the loan origination file complete with the bright red notary stamp. I held it up for everyone to see, specifically turning it so Jamal, sitting in the third row, had a perfect view. You and Trey forged my signature, Dominique. You used my social security number, and you put my grandmother brownstone up as collateral to secure the money. You committed federal identity theft. And then you took that stolen money and you used it to pay off your credit cards, buy your designer dress, and fund this ridiculous circus of a wedding. The congregation was completely silent, stunned into absolute paralysis. The magnitude of the crime was too massive to process quickly. I bought the debt yesterday, I announced, delivering the ultimate kill shot. The bank was thrilled to sell it. Which means Trey and Dominique owe me $150,000. And since neither of you have a dime to your name, I am executing the foreclosure on the loan immediately. Trey finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a pathetic squeak. Simone, you cannot do this. We are family. We are not family, Trey, I said, my voice dropping the microphone away from my mouth so only he could hear the lethal finality in my tone. We are a creditor and a debtor, and I am here to collect. I turned away from the shattered couple at the altar and looked down at my parents sitting in the front row. My father, James, was clutching his chest, his face pale with the sudden realization that his perfect daughter was a federal criminal and the man he was about to hand millions to was a sociopathic con artist. My mother, Patricia, looked like she had aged 20 years in the span of 5 minutes. Her shoulders were slumped, her pristine silver dress suddenly looking ridiculous. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. I looked her dead in the eye and raised the microphone one last time. You called me yesterday, Mom, demanding I pay the $15,000 catering bill for this wedding. You told me to be a good big sister and support the family. I offered her a cold, devastating smile. Well, Mom, I just saved you the cost of a divorce lawyer and protected the family trust fund from being completely drained by a predator. Consider the catering bill my wedding gift. You are welcome. I let the black microphone slip from my fingers. It hit the wooden podium with a loud, sharp thud that echoed through the entire cathedral. I turned my back on the altar, picked up my white leather clutch, and began to walk down the center aisle exactly the way I had come in. Flawless, unbothered, and completely victorious. As I walked away, the initial shock that had paralyzed the entire cathedral finally wore off, and the reality of the situation detonated like a bomb. Absolute chaos erupted behind me. The heavy silence was shattered by a cacophony of shouting, crying, and frantic movement. I could hear Aunt Denise screaming for someone to call a doctor, while Uncle Calvin shouted obscenities at the altar. I did not look back, but the heavy acoustics of the stone church painted a perfect picture of the destruction I had just unleashed. Trey, realizing that his grand scheme had completely collapsed and that a federal fraud investigator had just handed him a massive legal trap, panicked. His self-preservation instincts kicked in entirely, overriding any remaining loyalty he had to his hysterical bride. I heard the sharp scuff of his leather shoes slipping against the marble floor as he made a desperate break for it. He dropped the velvet box, abandoning Dominique at the altar, and bolted down the side aisle toward the sacristy exit, hoping to slip out the back doors. He did not make it very far. Dominique's uncles, who had been sitting in the second row, were already on their feet. Uncle George, a man who had worked construction his entire life, lunged across the aisle. He tackled Trey right around the waist with the force of a freight train. The sound of Trey's body slamming into the solid oak pew echoed violently over the shouts of the guests. Wood splintered, and Trey let out a loud, pained groan as he hit the ground. Several other male relatives swarmed the aisle, pinning the thrashing groom to the floor. The frat brothers, the men who had been laughing so loudly at the rehearsal dinner, were suddenly completely silent, slowly backing away toward the emergency exits, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a federal crime. I pushed the heavy front doors of the cathedral open and stepped out into the brilliant afternoon sunlight. The air outside was warm and fresh, a stark contrast to the suffocating toxic atmosphere I had just left behind. I walked gracefully down the wide stone steps, my white silk gown catching the breeze. As I reached the bottom step, the wail of sirens suddenly pierced the quiet downtown street. Two black and white police cruisers swung aggressively into the circular driveway of the church, their tires squealing against the pavement. Red and blue lights flashed brilliantly, reflecting off the massive stained glass windows of the cathedral. I had called the precinct 20 minutes before I arrived at the church. I had provided my federal investigator identification number and alerted them to the exact location of a suspect with active warrants for felony identity theft and commercial bank fraud. The police cruisers threw their vehicles into park, and 4 officers rushed out, unholstering their radios. They ran up the stone steps, passing right by me. I did not stop them, and they did not question me. I was just a woman in a beautiful white dress leaving a disastrous wedding. I turned my head slightly, watching as the officers pushed through the heavy oak doors and entered the screaming sanctuary. Less than a minute later, they emerged. Trey was being dragged out by his arms, his custom navy tuxedo wrinkled and covered in dust from the church floor. His hands were secured tightly behind his back in heavy metal handcuffs. His face was bruised from where he had hit the pew, and his eyes were wide with absolute terror. The officers shoved him roughly against the hood of the police cruiser to begin reading him his Miranda rights, right there in the church parking lot. Trey looked over his shoulder, his desperate eyes locking onto mine across the pavement. I offered him nothing, not a smile, not a frown, just the cold, empty indifference he completely deserved. I turned away from the pathetic scene and walked over to my luxury SUV. I unlocked the doors, the headlights flashing in acknowledgement. I opened the driver's side door and tossed my white leather clutch onto the passenger seat. "Simone, wait." The frantic, desperate voice echoed across the parking lot, accompanied by the rapid, frantic clicking of heels hitting the pavement. I turned slowly, resting my hand on the open car door. My mother, Patricia, was running toward me. She had practically shoved her way past the police officers to get outside. Her immaculate silver mother-of-the-bride gown was rumpled, and her perfectly styled hair was falling around her face in messy strands. The terrifying, towering arrogance she had displayed in my apartment just a few hours ago was completely eradicated. It had been entirely replaced by a wild, desperate panic. She reached my car, chest heaving, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide and filled with genuine tears, the first real tears I think I had ever seen her shed. "Simone, please," she gasped, reaching out and gripping the edge of my open car door as if her life depended on it. "You have to stop this. You have to tell the police there was a mistake. You have to call off your lawyers." I looked at the woman who had tormented me my entire life. The woman who had constantly pitted my sister against me, the woman who had demanded I fund my own humiliation and told me I was going to die completely alone. It was almost jarring to see her reduced to such a pathetic, pleading state. Patricia's breath hitched as she looked up at my completely unreadable face. "Please, Simone," she begged, her voice cracking into a high-pitched sob. "They are taking Trey away in a police car. Dominique is inside having a complete nervous breakdown. The bank is going to take everything from them. You have to help your sister fix this financial mess. Please, you are family. Family takes care of family." She threw my own words right back at me, weaponizing the concept of family one last time in a desperate bid to maintain control. She truly believed that if she cried hard enough, if she begged pitifully enough, I would fold. She thought the old Simone, the daughter desperate for her mother conditional love, was still in there somewhere, waiting to be summoned. but that daughter was dead. I looked at Patricia one last time. I did not feel angry. I did not feel the need to hurl insults or explain my actions. The absolute silence was far more devastating than any speech I could ever give. I gently reached out and placed my hand over her trembling fingers. For a fraction of a second, a look of hope flashed across her face. She thought I was comforting her. Instead, I firmly pried her fingers off the edge of my car door and pushed her hand away. I stepped into the driver's seat and pulled the heavy door shut. The solid thud severed the connection between us permanently. I started the engine, the deep hum vibrating through the vehicle. Patricia stood frozen on the pavement, staring at me through the glass, her mouth open in silent shock. I reached out and pressed the button on my door panel. The darkly tinted window rolled up smoothly, completely erasing her from my view. I put the SUV in drive and pulled out of the circular driveway, leaving the flashing police lights, the screaming bride, and the shattered family far behind me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, watching my mother shrink into a tiny, insignificant speck before I turned the corner and she disappeared completely. 6 months have passed since that spectacular afternoon at the cathedral. Life has a very reliable way of balancing the scales when you finally stop letting toxic people stack the weights against you. The fallout from the wedding was absolute and irreversible. Trey is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting trial for multiple counts of identity theft, bank fraud, and wire fraud. Without my father's massive trust fund to pay for a high-powered defense attorney, he was assigned an overworked public defender who is desperately trying to arrange a plea deal. He is looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Dominique's fairy tale ended before she even made it to the reception hall. My holding company executed the foreclosure flawlessly. With no assets and a mountain of legal debt, she was forced to declare bankruptcy. The last I heard through the grapevine, she is working a minimum wage retail job just to make ends meet, living in a cramped studio apartment on the far side of the city. She spends her days complaining to anyone who will listen about how unfair her life is, completely incapable of taking accountability for her own actions. My parents tried to bail her out initially, but the social humiliation was simply too much for them to bear. News of the dramatic arrest at the altar spread through their elite social circles like wildfire. The country club practically exiled them, and Patricia has become an absolute social pariah in the community she used to rule. I have maintained strict and absolute no contact with all of them. My phone numbers are changed, my emails are blocked, and my peace of mind is fiercely protected. As for me, I am thriving in a way I never thought possible. I ultimately decided to sell my grandmother brownstone. Keeping it felt like holding on to a museum of painful memories, and I was ready to build something entirely new. I sold the property for well over asking price, and used the massive profits to purchase a gorgeous downtown penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. I also left my corporate auditing job and opened my own independent financial consulting firm. I now specialize in protecting women from financial abuse and domestic fraud. Business is booming, and for the first time in my 35 years, I am surrounded only by people who value my intelligence and respect my boundaries completely. I look back at that heavy gold foil wedding invitation, sometimes not with anger but with profound gratitude. They thought they were inviting me to witness my own defeat, but they actually gave me the perfect stage to set myself free. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, but occasionally you have to hand them the garbage bags. Have you ever had to expose a narcissistic family member or set a massive boundary to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, justice, and finding your true worth. Thank you for listening, and remember that your peace is always worth fighting for.